Hi, you guys. I just have some practical questions. I noticed in the recommendations that I think it's A has a cost to it, but none of the others do. Can you just let us, you know, you don't have to give me the number now for each one of these, but I'd like to know what the cost is to implement each one of these solutions or
They're all free.
recommendations. Hey, what?
They're all free.
They're all free, okay.
Yeah, zero cost.
I vote yes on all of them.
There are differences in
Sure.
the cost of them that we can anticipate. Now, we know that in a dual immersion program, we are providing the students with a teacher and instructional materials that we would need to do even if they weren't a part of that program. So I really don't want to dive in with numbers for you. I just would rather say that we are looking at that as well. That is a question that we will answer. And that because it has been a board priority, we will be working also with our community partners to figure out where they have materials. We know that there's, for example, a Vietnamese school that's going on right now, and they have resources to share with us. So.
No, I'm not asking for the numbers right now. I just would like to see them when we move forward, because it would be very helpful to us. And then I know that the Japanese program is a magnet. What other programs are magnets? Is Ainsworth still a magnet for Spanish? Or are they neighborhood schools where it's just within the boundaries?
No, Richmond is the only one of its kind.
The only magnet school
Yeah.
pulls kids from all around the
Right.
district. Everything else is a neighborhood school, and you have to be in the neighborhood.
Well, you don't have to be in the neighborhood, but they are neighborhood schools that have neighborhood programs. Richmond is the only one that doesn't have a neighborhood program alongside an immersion program.
The others are.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it's kind of what I'm asking, but what I also want to know is, for those that are in the neighborhood schools, do we have a preference for neighborhood kids in those programs? Or is it, so we fill it up lottery-wise with all the neighborhood kids first, and then if there's any spaces left?
Well, each school has their own plan of operation, and that really depends by, that really depends on whether you're talking about native English speakers or native Spanish speakers or native whatever speakers. At most schools, the native English speakers have a preference for being neighborhood, but at some of our immersion programs, we're really pulling the native speakers of the partner language from outside.
Sure.
So, you know, there's some shifting in the weighing of which one's preferred.
Well, I would, and this is, if this is the way that it works, just tell me, but if you need to fill up those native speakers, of course they get the preference over the neighborhood kids. Is that correct?
So that it's balanced.
So you have to, because you have to have a certain number of native speakers.
And so what I would say to that is that we have shifted practice over the last 18 months to really, we're going to have Judy jump in, but to emphasize balance around our emergent bilingual students.
So let me ask the bigger question, and that is, are we looking at a policy to make these all consistent? That's a great, thank you.
So just to clarify for anybody who was trying to, you guys did a great job on it, but it is one of our more complicated things. A school that's co-located in a neighborhood, there's generally set-asides for some of those neighborhood kids, and in a number of the programs, not all, there's also the set-aside that's cut by language. So if you live in the neighborhood and it's a Spanish immersion program and you're a native Spanish speaker, you're in one bucket. If you're a native English speaker, you're in another bucket. And so most of our programs have about 4 buckets. What we're talking about is making sure that we're intentional within those buckets, that our emerging bilinguals are honored, as well as potentially our heritage speakers over time. So we don't know if that's more buckets, less buckets. We are looking at some consistency across the program. So if you're applying in one zip code, what you have to do is pretty consistent with somewhere else. So we are locking arms and working together on those pieces.
Consistency, I think, is important for our parents and our students. Yeah. So, can I have another one? You talked a little bit about travel for families, and I'm just emphasizing that I think it's really important for us to think about how our families are able to access these programs, and travel is sometimes a really big deal. And then the other thing that I have questions about is about attrition. I mean, I see some, for example, again, the Japanese program where you start with, not sure how many classes they have, but by the time they get to middle school, there are quite a bit less students, and by the time they get to high school, it really splits out. And so what are we doing to consider that and the number of students that we have to start with in the schools in order to continue that program into the middle school and then into the high school?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, we want to have programs that are so strong that people really, really want to stay in them. We know that sometimes families move outside of the district because of economic situations, and there's not too much that we can do about that sometimes. But the other thing is that when we're starting programs, we like to, and I want to make sure that we explore all possible ways of supporting our emergent bilinguals, but our preferred way is to start a program with 2 kindergarten classrooms so that you have enough kids to be able to sustain a program even as we have some attrition.
So do you see, or do we have an idea about how much attrition on average we get between first grade and 6th grade, or kindergarten and 6th grade?
We really don't, because
is it all over the
it
place?
varies very, very greatly. And on top of that, in some programs we have attrition, in other programs we find that native speakers of that partner language are coming into that neighborhood, and then those classrooms fill up as we allow them to come in. So it's not always an attrition issue.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, and one just to highlight for our community members. I appreciate the caveats you guys all put in about capacity, building capacity, and what the numbers really see, because I happen to be really familiar with a couple of these buildings, and the fact that it appears that there's space in those buildings is a misnomer. So however we're calculating that, not very helpful. And then I wanted to get to a question, and it's actually, there's a school dealing with it, at least one school dealing with it right now. And I think the last director in your place, Debbie, was really a strong advocate of middle schools because of the challenge in licensure in K-12. Are we moving in that direction? Is that part of this conversation? Because that will impact both the enrollment and transfer as well as the district-wide boundaries as we look at that. How does that interact?
Well, we are in that conversation, and we are partnering with SACIT to make sure that the direction that we head is aligned and collaborative with their thinking. We know that the K model for immersion students is very difficult to staff, but we are also looking with HR at possible ways of staffing those programs differently so that even within K-8 models they can be more sustainable.
We're also looking at more aggressive recruitment techniques. So looking at programs that are actually producing bilingual educators throughout the nation and seeing how we can be more aggressive in recruiting in those universities. And HR has been really working well with us on that.
Can you provide me a little example on how we would staff differently to be creative about that?
Yes.
And maybe it's too specific. I just
No. Well, we have some K-8 programs. For example, well, I don't want to give examples. We have some K-8 programs that are near each other, and yet they're not sharing some of those immersion teachers. So instead of sharing the immersion teachers, the immersion teacher is teaching 6th and 7th and then 8th at the same building, and that creates a very difficult load. And if we can share that teacher, maybe teaching 6 at one building and teaching 6 at the other building, that might be easier and require less certifications. So that is something that we're looking at, but we are looking at all aspects of a K-5 and a K-8 and staffing and all those pieces to see really what's going to be the best answer for each location.